We are delighted that you've been able to make it to our Growing Up Digital event tonight. My name is John Fenley and I'm the New South Wales Mental Health Commissioner. The New South Wales Mental Health Commission is committed to the full recognition of the rights of people whose lives are affected by mental illness and to hopefully guide New South Wales away from the history of discrimination and stigma which has affected this space. That's why it gives me such great pleasure to be able to introduce our panellists this evening on this topic. First, please allow me to introduce Mia Freedman. I'm sure many of you know of Mia Freedman. Mia is the co-founder of Mamamia women's media company. Also on our panel is Samantha Yorke. Sam works in public policy and government affairs at Google Australia with a focus on privacy, safety and security. And rounding out our panel of experts tonight is the CEO of Australia's leading online youth mental health organisation, ReachOut.com, Jono Nicholas. Jono is one of the most prominent and passionate advocates for the mental health of young people in Australia. He has a background in child psychology and human rights. Now, can I say it is my great pleasure to be able to hand over to them and look forward to hearing their insights, but also the discussion that we'll be able to have in this room. Thank you.
I often talk to people about ReachOut, and as someone who's worked in the digital space for 10 years, I'm a big champion of how it can be used for good and a big champion particularly of ReachOut, which is something I cite often. Can you tell everyone a little bit about ReachOut and why you started it?
Sure. So ReachOut is an online mental health service for young people and now their parents. We were actually the first digital mental health service in the world when we launched in 1998. And every month here in Australia, we would be accessed by around 140,000 Australians, most of whom are young people going through tough times across a range of issues. And probably the easiest way to think about it is we're the entry point, we're the safe place where young people go now. A lot of them are looking for help and information, and we can either help them directly or also help them find the other amazing services that exist in our country, whether they be Headspace, Kids Helpline, Lifeline and others.
And what are the main concerns that you hear from parents, and what are the main concerns you hear from kids that contact you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing we hear from young people is a general worry. I think what's amazing about ReachOut is we would cover 300 issues, and at any given time we would be having young people accessing that range of issues. What is probably most interesting for us is young people don't come through the lens of mental illness. So they hear words like depression and anxiety and go, that's not me. Yeah. They hear things like exam stress and I've been dumped by my boyfriend or girlfriend, or I think I might be gay, and then they come into a service like ours. So I think that's my first insight for those of you who are parents is the labels that we put on things are not the way in which our young people think, and we've got to think through their entry point.
That's so interesting.
From parents, I think the one thing that we can all kind of understand as parents is there's just a general ongoing worry of incompetence up until we feel like we nail it, and then we go back to a general worry about incompetence. And that's what we see more and more with parenting, that in the digital age, parents themselves are really stressed. Oftentimes they're saying, the only time I can kind of take stock with my partner is at 11 p.m. at night going, are you worried, am I worried? And that's where we're finding now, this is the first generation of digital parents who are actually accessing online as their first source of support, because it's at that time where you can come together and say, what could we do? And ultimately, they're looking for a lot of help and information to know that there's really a problem. And I think that's probably the big issue that we're seeing.
Sam, I imagine Google is the first place that most people go when they've got a problem. And I read once that it's interesting the difference between the way adults search for things and the way kids search for things. That adults are more likely to type in depression or anxiety, whereas kids are more likely to type in, I just broke up with my girlfriend and I feel really sad, like type in their feelings. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that is right, Mia, that young people use a much more of a narrative-driven way of searching for information, and they're not afraid to put lots of words into that little box. Whereas I think I'm much more economical with my searches. It's kind of 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 if I'm really pushing the boat out words.
It's true. I know I was reading that someone just looked at their grandmother's search history and it said, use please and thank you. Please, can you please tell me where? I like, thank you. As if they were talking to, a real person or maybe Siri. I know that Google, one of Google's, or the philosophy that Google's built on is do no harm, do no evil.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And so many people parents are understandably freaked out by technology and about digital. What would you say to them on behalf of the biggest technology company in the world?
Yeah.
No pressure.
The other mission that Google has, Mia, is to organise the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And I think that's really what I would point to in the conversation that we're having tonight, which is that really we're in the business of trying to answer any question that anybody could pose at any point in time, and to give them a result through our search engine at least, which answers their question and meets their need in exactly that moment. So we're in a pretty unique position because we know at any one point what the answer to the question somebody's looking for. So it's a very contextual understanding of what somebody might need help with at that point in time.
And just to explain to people who might not be sure, so I might be worried that what if my daughter types in anorexia and gets sent to a pro-anorexia site? How can we be sure that that's not going to happen and that hopefully they're going to be directed to ReachOut or somewhere that's a responsible source of information? Yeah.
So we have a program whereby we give free search advertising budget to organisations like ReachOut and the Butterfly Foundation, who are specifically interested in body image issues, so that they can use, the first couple of results that you get when you type in any search, that it's generally a paid placement. We give those slots away to organisations and charities that are in a great place to provide support services when somebody types in a keyword like, I'm worried I might be anorexic, or I always feel like I'm too fat, or whatever the search query is. We've got a great way of helping organisations like that develop a list of keywords that, when entered, will produce their results right at the top.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And Jono, what sort of tips would you give to parents knowing the difference between just normal childhood or teenage angst and when there could really be a problem? Because sometimes it can be really hard to tell.
It is a really fine line. I think the first thing that I'd say is that you go back to the goal, not the input. So the goal is that you want your kids to be happy and well for the longest period of point in time. And what you're really looking out for is change. So if you are seeing something that's changed, an unexpected behaviour, a kid who is otherwise generally doing pretty well and they're grumpy at dinner, then that's your cue to intervene. The point of intervention is actually a question. And that question is, I've noticed something changed. Is everything okay? Now, the great thing about that question is the worst case scenario is your kid realises that you care enough to notice that something's changed. So even if they say no, they at least know that you care that something's changed. The other scenario is they say, yes, actually there's something bigger going on, and then it is really, what do we do then? But I think that's the first thing is a lot of us hope things will go away. But what we know about children and young people is they communicate better through their behaviour than their words.
How do we teach girls and boys, but mostly girls, that they are not their likes? To not confuse their identity with the number of likes and comments they get. Like you hear about girls on Instagram, my son told me about this. A girl, if she doesn't get enough likes on a post, she'll take it down because it's embarrassing.
So backing up a step, I would keep coming back to a conversation that you have, particularly with your teenagers, which is, it's my job as your parent to keep you safe, happy and well, in that order, right? I can sacrifice...
Safe, happy, well.
I can sacrifice your happiness for your safety, right?
Yeah, right.
And what that means is, when you're tiny, I hold your hand across the road, even if you yell and scream at me. And as you get older, the goal doesn't change, how we negotiate that changes. And so what that does, I think, for your kid is start saying, as long as you are safe, happy and well, then I'm going to keep letting the rope out, right? That means that I'll give you your own account. Secrets are really important for teenagers. I think one of the challenges we've got in parenting is this actually generation is the most conservative generation in eons. They drink less, they use less drugs, They drive more safely.
They're not having sex
They're not having sex at a young... Like, this idea that
Because
this
they're
is an
sensitive.
out-of-control generation is actually a myth. But at the same time, we all did things as teenagers that we wouldn't want to share with our parents. And if you set the goal that says, as long as you're safe, happy and well, and safe, happy and well in our household looks like you're respectful of your parents, you do your chores, you're doing okay at school, you've got a balanced life, then your private time is your private time, however that's constructed relative to age. And then what it says is, to the question around likes, that we will keep engaging if I start noticing you are not safe, happy and well. So my conversation there on likes is that this is not making you happy. So engaging in this behaviour does not seem to be leading to a good outcome for you. What do we need to change to get to a good outcome? This is as much about how do we teach our teenagers self-regulation. What do we do to move from being the person who guarantees their safety to being the safety barrier on the road that does not prevent an accident taking place. And that's the reality of trust, that accidents take place, but it does mean that we are reducing the likely consequences of what that will mean. So by being up, you might reduce drinking by 2 or 3 kind of drinks for the final couple of hours over a whole bunch of parties. That makes a big difference in a teenager's life, rather than thinking my parents don't notice.
Sam, I wanted to ask you firstly about the ESafety Commissioner, which you have had a lot to do with, and any other tips or tricks or programs or apps that parents can use.
Yeah, so the Office of the ESafety Commissioner was established by the government almost 2 years ago now, Jono.
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah.
And what does it do?
So this is a totally new role, a new regulator, who was tasked initially with being a port of call for children in Australia who were finding themselves the victims of cyberbullying. And this commissioner has been given the power by law to require social media sites to remove cyberbullying material from their networks. And this role has been around for 2 years now. They're receiving complaints. Interestingly, they're receiving complaints from adults as well as children who are victims of cyberbullying.
I'm sure.
And recently, the office's remit has been expanded to actually not just be focused on children, but to be focused on all Australians.
So they originally thought it was just going to be about children,
yes,
but it's broader than that.
Exactly. So it's now broadened to include other vulnerable members of the community, whether they might be victims of family violence or whether they might be silver surfers, people who...
What are silver surfers?
Silver surfers, elderly surfers of the internet.
Like grey
Yes.
nomads, but online.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Silver surfers.
Yes.
I learned anything tonight.
So, so their office take a very keen interest in education as well. So they see a very strong responsibility around educating people about how social networks work, all of the tools and the controls that are actually built into social networking platforms that people should be using.
Do you mean like blocking and...
Blocking and, you know, whether your profile is public or private, you know, deleting comments, flagging images or videos or text when you feel like it crosses a line and it needs to be removed by the platform provider.
And you can do things like you can close comments on Instagram.
Exactly.
And you can do, on Facebook, there's a filter where you can put words that if anyone uses those words, their comment never comes up.
Exactly. So there's all sorts of amazing tools that are available to people today.
What's the best way to find them, though? It can feel so overwhelming.
You can Google them.
Great.
Google them.
So what would I Google? Dear Google, please help me find...
If you know, Google, where are the Facebook safety settings?
Ah.
How do I make my profile private on Instagram?
So just use Google like you would use a person.
Totally.
Or Siri.
Totally.
And
using
tips, tricks,
those-
apps,
Tips, tricks and apps.
sites, besides obviously ReachOut.
ReachOut is an amazing one. There's some lovely apps that are available to help young people manage their mental health. I love Smiling Mind. My son goes to sleep. He does a meditation most nights when he's going to sleep. It's a really lovely app, and it's broken down into age groups as well. So depending on how old your child is, they'll have appropriate meditation apps. I'm going to embarrass Jono by talking about the ReachOut Toolkit, which is an amazing resource where a young person can go onto the toolkit and answer a questionnaire, which will then direct them to a number of apps that have been reviewed by experts in the field, and then people can download those apps if they choose to. There's just a wealth of incredible resources
I
out
use one
there.
I've got one called Meditation Studio. It's an app, it costs about $7, but compared to doing a meditation course, it's fantastic, and it's got guided meditations and all different types of one. It's got different ones for anxiety or stress or happiness or all different things.
Amazing.
So, you know, the idea that technology is the enemy, it's actually an incredible resource for parents and for mental health, I think.
Absolutely. In fact, this is a generation, so putting it in the positive, you are a young person who is wondering, am I gay or straight? When I grew up, you were wondering, am I the only person at this school, right? Am I completely isolated in the world? You go online now and you see everyone with a social media site putting up the rainbow flag, right? So as much, and this is for me about the online world, we often concentrate on the things that are bad, but actually often what we see is the reverse, which is you can construct the world that you want to construct online. And so part of the challenge, I think, with raising young people now is engage in the online world that makes you most happy and well.
And I love that idea of safe, happy and well is helping, maybe sitting down with your child and looking through who they're following on Instagram and with them and being like, how does this make you feel? How does this make... I mean, I do that all the time myself. I look and I go, oh, I'm feeling really uncomfortable after I look at Instagram, and I'm feeling really, you know, inadequate or vulnerable or insecure. Best I stop following this and this that's making me feel that way. Get amongst it with your kids. Like, get them to explain to you what Snapchat is and how it works, because there's nothing that'll puff them up more than being the expert teaching mum how to do something. Whether they're 6 or whether they're, 20, they just love it. I mean, I've had some of my most cherished memories are watching my children teaching my parents things online, like how to do emoji or what Snapchat is or how to join Instagram. And kids just love that idea of being a teacher. And it is very hard to police something that you don't understand. And it's not to say that you have to become Kylie Jenner and start Snapchatting yourself every day or even ever. But understanding how it works and having a bit of a play with it for 5 minutes is going to really, really help you supervise and understand your child. Because just going, oh, that just is that selfie stuff, it's just rubbish, or that Instagram, it's just, what's the point? It's all just, junk. What are you wasting your time for? Go climb a tree. And that will actually just, widen that gap between you and your child. They're into technology. If you want to stay relevant to them, if you want to stay influential in their lives, you've got to go where they are and speak their language. And so on that note, I would thank you all so much for coming. Thank my fellow panellists, and I'll see you online.
Events like tonight, where you've got 3 really experienced people on the stage coming from quite different perspectives, provide, I think, parents with an opportunity firstly to realise they're not in this by themselves. Everyone's having this experience. Most of us who grew up without a mobile phone, as parents will have the experience, that discomfort, the uncertainty, the fears about the possible evils of technology, and certainly there's the crude evils of things like accessing pornography and that sort of thing. They're the simple ones. The more subtle and nuanced concerns are the extent to which a child becomes unbalanced in their activity, ceases to get the sleep they need, may be triggered in some ways by things they see online and social media, and may end up having their own self-esteem damaged. Now, we shouldn't be letting that happen, because of course we should be, as Jono pointed out, we should be looking at what's regular in our life, what's changing in our life that would make us question whether there's something wrong with a child, and actually having that conversation with them. That's a really important thing. I think a lot of parents would have gone away tonight thinking, wow, I can have some structure in this, and I can have some influence in this. Not necessarily control entirely, but certainly some influence in the way my child engages with that technology.
My top 3 tips for parenting in the digital age would have to be, first and foremost, you have to speak the language. You have to understand what Instagram is,
what Facebook is, what Snapchat is. So my first tip is get amongst it, because if you can't play the game, it's very hard to make the rules. My second tip is that you need to have a contract with your child about social media. And that contract needs to go both ways. And I think that's a really good way to encourage your child to participate. So, and by that I mean, you have to have agreements about what they can publish, and you have to have agreements about what you can publish. Because, you know, we're talking about a generation of kids who are growing up with mums who might have been bloggers and who might have blogged about them since they were pregnant with their kids. And suddenly these kids are 10, 11, 12, 15, and they don't want their mum writing about their business anymore. So you have to dangle the carrot and say, well, we can have a conversation and you can put rules around what I post, and I'm going to put rules around what you post. So it might be no school uniforms, no selfies, no bikinis. You know, you have to work out the rules for yourself, but it should go both ways. And my third tip would be, you will never have as much power with your child as when you are letting them do something for the first time, whether it's giving them a phone or a computer, letting them join Facebook, letting them join Instagram. That is when you've got your most power, and they will agree to anything at that point. You will never have that power again. So use it. That's the time you want to do that contract. And if it's a written contract, that can help them take it more seriously. And then you refer back to it. You put the contract on the fridge and you say, hang on, remember we said this. And it can't be like, oh, I didn't know. It's like, remember before you went on Instagram, this is what we said. So that'd be my 3 tips.
Parenting doesn't change that much. That the parenting challenges of previous generations are the same as this generation. What will change in the next 5 years is how young people interact through technology. And what we as parents need to look out for are, as they interact with that technology, do they continue to be safe, happy and well? If they're not, then take a step back, ask them, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? What technology do we need to change so that we can get back to the goal that everyone is safe, happy and well?
Technology usage is a tricky one now because we use technology for so many different purposes, and I think the idea of screen time and limiting screen time has actually become quite obsolete now because of the many different contexts that young people are using technology. I'm quite happy for my child to be using the internet to research a project for school, for instance, and I'm not concerned about how long he might spend doing that, but I am concerned if he's spending hours on end playing Minecraft. So the context is really important, and I think the balance needs to be there.